Hello, and welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. My name's Eric, and it's been a couple weeks since I've done a full garden tour video, so I thought today I would start by doing a full garden tour. And today I wanted to talk about probably my favorite thing to do in the garden, and that is harvesting. I'm going to show you guys some examples of the things that I've been harvesting these past couple weeks and today specifically. And I'm also going to talk to you guys about knowing when things are ripe or when to pick something to harvest your vegetables. So I'm going to talk about kind of the factors that I use or the things that I look at to know when stuff's ready to pick. So let's get started. Over here, this is my herb garden. This is close to the house. In this first pot right here, I have mint. The variety that I'm growing this year is called orange mint. This stuff I highly recommend. It's really good. It has sort of a citrus flavor to it, and I've been using this orange mint mainly in drinks. I love it in iced tea. It's great in lemonade, summer cocktails. It's just been a great plant. I also like this variety because it's fairly compact. As everyone knows, mint can spread pretty easily, so I've been real pleased with that variety of mint. I recommend you guys try that. It's called orange mint. In this little pot, this is my Thai basil. You can see the purple flowers have been forming this week. This variety of basil, you don't necessarily have to pinch the flowers off as readily as you do the sweet basil. This Thai basil will continue to produce lots of leaves even when it's flowering. Now if we continue over here, this is my cayenne pepper. I actually have 2 plants growing in this pot. I harvested lots of cayenne peppers today. These are some of the younger green ones that I left on the plant. This pepper will continue to grow taller and produce peppers right through the heat of the summer. But later in the video, I'll show you guys some nice red ones that I harvested today. Continuing along, you can see my sweet basil kind of tipped over here. We had a windstorm yesterday, so later today I'm going to have to kind of just stake that up with some bamboo sticks, but that plant's going to be fine. And lastly, in the herb garden right down there in the basil pot is my Greek oregano. It's a slow growing herb, but that plant is doing real well for me. So that's the herb garden. I've been harvesting lots of herbs, using them in marinades and salads and you name it. I love the classic caprese salad where you just use tomato and mozzarella cheese and basil. Really good. So, okay, now we can come over to this garden. This is my summer garden. This is the garden. These plants love the heat. We have had a very hot spring so far. It's been a challenging season weather-wise. We've had very little rain. We are actually in a drought. We are about 8 inches of rain below the normal amount that we would have at this date in the year. So it's been hot, it's been dry. So it's been a challenging spring, but I've been able to harvest quite a bit of produce. So over here, let's start with this row here right on the end. If you look at these plants, this is okra. You can see they have sort of like a 5-finger leaf, kind of like a maple leaf, if you will. But these plants grow pretty much on a single stem, 1 or 2 stems. They'll get pretty tall. And this week, as a matter of fact, I just started harvesting okra. The variety I grow is called Clemson Spineless, and these plants are doing real good. I have about a 20-foot row planted, and I have 12 plants. So they're doing real well. I'll show you guys some of that okra in a little bit here. Now here on the end, you can see these large leaves, these vining plants. This is called Cherokee Tan Pumpkin. It's a variety of winter squash that grows really well in my area. I grew these last year. It's probably next to tomatoes. It's going to be my favorite vegetable. They are very disease resistant. They love the heat, and you can see how I grow them. I've talked about this. I basically train the vines to grow around the perimeter of this garden bed. So in the middle, I'll have my sweet potatoes and okra, and around the outside, I can get these pumpkins to vine. If you look down here, you can see how they just grow on these vines, and you can kind of take the end of this vine and just kind of, move it in the direction where you want them to grow. If you look over here, I've got them started to wrap around this corner of the garden. So they will continue just to grow all the way around the perimeter, and I should start to see some pumpkins on these vines in a couple weeks. Now lastly, in this garden, in the middle, I have 3 rows of sweet potatoes planted. They're coming along real well. You can see how they're starting to vine, and the leaves are starting to spread like a ground cover. That's what you're looking for. That's how this plant grows. I have 3 different varieties of sweet potatoes growing. This variety, this first one, is a row of Beauregard. This middle row is a row of a variety called Georgia Jet. And this last row is a variety called O. Henry. And they're doing real well. I come into this garden about once a week and weed it really well. But in general, this garden's doing real good. We'll stop real quick here. I talked about weeding. This tool right here is probably my favorite tool in the garden, and it's called a scuffle hoe. And I use this all the time. This is a tool that you use basically for weeding, but it's got that blade on the end of it, and you kind of come in here and run it back and forth, and you can remove these shallow weeds that are in your garden space real easily. And it also helps in aerating your soil and keeping it nice and loose. So I just wanted to show you guys that tool. That's probably the garden tool that I use the most. A little scuffle hoe. They also call it a stirrup hoe. It's usually a steel blade on here, so you can keep it nice and sharp. So yeah, I do a lot of weeding in the garden. Okay. So now, as we come over here to my spring garden, some things to note right out of the gate. There's an empty spot on this side of the garden. That's where I grew my yellow squash this year. But I've talked to you guys about these plants have a certain lifespan for me, and with my heat and humidity, these plants near the finish line, usually around the middle of July. But I talked to you guys, this year we've had a drought, and we have had very hot weather so far. We've had 2 to 3 weeks now in a row of temperatures in the 90s. We've had high humidity. Man, we had some days this past week where we had heat indexes around 118. So these plants are nearing the finish line. The yellow squash are done. If we come in here real quick, my cucumbers will be what kind of dies next. If you look at these plants, you're going to see there's lots of yellowing on the leaves. These plants are just succumbing to the heat and the humidity. They've more or less stopped making cucumbers. So probably next week I will remove all these vines and clear. When your plants start showing signs of disease, you want to remove them from your garden space. You don't want that disease to spread onto your other plants that are still growing well. So what I wanted to do next is show you on this table here, I have some examples of most of the varieties of produce that I'm growing this spring. So I thought I would just go through the varieties and kind of show you guys the plants and talk about how I know when to harvest things. So we can start right up here. These are my cayenne peppers. This is the plant that I showed you earlier, the two plants that I have in my herb garden. So I've been harvesting these. When they're young and green like this, I like to use them in stir fries or in chili. Now, my plan for these red ones is to dry them out in my food dehydrator and make some cayenne pepper powder with them. This next pepper here is my jalapeno. The nice thing about growing your own vegetables is you can harvest things at different stages of its life and have different flavor. These young jalapenos that most people are familiar with, but when you leave the pepper on the vine, they turn this red and they get really sweet. So I love to leave some peppers on the vine until they really start changing colors. A lot of people don't realize, but most peppers, not all of them, but most peppers, when they start out and they're young, they're gonna start out green. Habaneros that turn orange, cayennes, jalapenos. But basically, as the pepper ripens and gets more mature, that's when the pepper tends to turn its ultimate color. Maybe red, maybe orange, maybe a yellow. You can see that happening with these sweet banana peppers. I've got some yellow, but as I leave them on the plant longer, they turn this nice bright orange. And most peppers, when they get that final color, they tend to be sweeter. So next I thought we could go over here in the garden real quick and I'll show you these plants. Starting with the poblano peppers. Whoops, I don't know if I showed you those. Yep, let me show you real quick here. These are poblano peppers right here. So if we go over here, these three plants right here are my poblano peppers. You can see I still have quite a few on these plants. Poblano peppers get very tall, so you can see these are a 4-foot cage on these, and the plants are, over the top of the cages. So these peppers will hang on for about another month. They don't mind the heat. They'll keep producing peppers. Down here on the end, these are my banana peppers. The plants are quite a bit smaller, but they're still producing a lot of peppers. And lastly, over here are my 3 jalapeno peppers, and there's lots of jalapenos in here. I haven't been harvesting many of my jalapenos yet, but these plants are doing great. Lots of peppers still left to harvest. So next, you can see I'm starting on these plants. If you look at my indeterminate tomato plants here, I don't know if you guys can see real well, but these leaves are starting to turn brown and yellow. They're just struggling. So I've been harvesting lots of tomatoes this past couple weeks. I still have a lot more on these vines. The cool thing about these tomatoes is even as your plants might start to look a little rough. They're going to start to turn yellow and brown and look like they're dying. But these tomatoes, the fruits that you have set on those plants will still continue to ripen. So all these tomato plants that I have left here, I have lots of tomatoes left to harvest. And even though the plants look like they're going to be dying soon, and they are, these fruits I'll be harvesting all within this next week. So now, next, if you look here, these are some eggplant. I've been harvesting lots of eggplant this past week. I have 3 plants growing, 1, 2, 3 right here, and they will continue to set eggplants through the heat too. So these plants I will keep in the garden longer than the tomatoes and the cucumbers. So really happy with my eggplant production this year. I'm kind of wishing I had planted more plants because like last week I harvested about 12 eggplants about this size. So it's been a really good year for me. Now Oh, down here in the corner, this is some example of my okra. I showed you guys the plants earlier, but this is what your okra looks like. As far as when to harvest, most vegetables, when you're wanting to harvest them, I recommend picking them then when they're still young. Summer squash, cucumbers, peppers, a lot of things taste a lot better when they're still young. So okra is one of those. You want to harvest okra when the pods haven't gotten real big yet. When they get real big, they tend to get tough. Peppers, it's just a matter of knowing how big the pepper is at maturity and how red or dark you want it, what color you want. Now tomatoes can be harvested as soon as the tomato starts to turn from green. They call it blushing. As soon as it starts to turn pink or red, you can harvest that tomato and it will ripen indoors. I actually like harvesting my tomatoes when they're still just barely turning color. And the reason is, I've talked about, I want to get that tomato off the vine and indoors as soon as I can, because every extra day that it's still outside growing on the plant, that's an extra day for a squirrel to come and get it and eat it, or some bugs to get inside of it, or something to go wrong. So I highly recommend harvesting tomatoes just when they start to turn whatever, off of green, or right when they start to blush. If you come over here, I'll show you guys some of my Amelia Determinate tomatoes here. If you look underneath here, see how those are there's one hanging there, two. See how they're just starting to turn orange? When I get done with this video later today, I will come in here and I'm going to be harvesting a lot of tomatoes. It could end up being close to 100 because I've just got tomatoes all through these plants. I've shown you guys before, they're finally starting to ripen. So I've been really harvesting a lot of tomatoes. So now, as far as my varieties, if we go back here, we can start with my 2 cherry tomato varieties. One I grew is this red one, and that's called Juliet Hybrid. I'm very pleased with that. The tomatoes are delicious. They produced lots of tomatoes. They kind of look like a mini Roma tomato. My other small cherry tomato is called Yellow Pear. This is actually a hybrid variety that I've grown in the past, and I just love the shape and the color of them. They're like a little pear, and they're super sweet. They're just a delicious cherry tomato. Now, if we continue along here, this tomato right here, these yellow ones, this is called Carolina Gold. And then these 3 here, these are my Amelia. These 2 tomatoes are examples of the 2 varieties of determinate tomatoes I grew this year. I've talked about, you can see these T-posts here. These 3 rows of plants are all those Amelia tomatoes. And then these 3 plants right here that are in front of my cucumber trellis, they're the Carolina Gold determinate variety. And so far, this is my first year growing this Carolina Gold, and it has become absolutely one of my favorite tomatoes. You can see how they turn this nice bright orange. They are absolutely as sweet as can be. If you like your tomatoes to have a little bit of acidity or bite to them, this wouldn't be for you. This is just a sweet tomato, but it was absolutely fully disease resistant. I didn't have any blossom end rot. All the fruits are uniform in shape. I'm just really pleased with that variety. I would highly recommend it. I'm definitely going to be growing it every year. Also, the Amelia tomato, you can see these produce some nice big tomatoes. So I'm very pleased also with the Amelia tomatoes. Just overall, really happy with my 2 varieties of determinants. So now, lastly, I can show you, I also grew 2 varieties of indeterminate tomatoes. Now, both of these cherry tomatoes are indeterminate, but I also grew this variety right here that's called Parks Whopper Improved. And I've grown these before. These tomatoes are delicious. They turn nice bright red. Some of them get pretty good size. So I'm pretty pleased with that variety. And the last variety that I grew this year, and so far I've only harvested one tomato, but I only planted one plant. But this one is called Beefmaster. And Beefmaster is known to grow enormous tomatoes. So I almost grew that just to have fun, to grow a real big tomato. And so far, this is the largest tomato I've grown this season. And this is a Beefmaster variety. And I weighed this yesterday, and it weighs exactly 1 pound. So I'm super excited about that. That's my first 1 pound tomato of the year. This one here I didn't weigh today, but I'm thinking that's a little under. That's probably a 12 ouncer of that Amelia. So yeah, pretty cool. I always like to have fun growing the real big heirloom varieties, but in general this year I talked to you guys about, I really focused on hybrid varieties and varieties that have built-in disease resistance, because you can see that from the looks of my garden now, this is why I talked about I have to try to plant this stuff so early. Like my last frost date, early in the year, I mean. My last frost date is March 1st. So I try to get these plants planted as absolutely right around that date as I can, because I want to try to get March, April, May, June, as much time in before basically the heat sets in. Because I know these plants are all going to die around the middle of July. So that's kind of why, like I say, I really try to get these plants in early, get as much production out of them as I can, and pretty much everything will be removed by the middle of July. So I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for today. I just love this is just what's so amazing and so rewarding about growing your own food, is you can just look how pretty and the variety of the color of all these different vegetables. It's just as healthy as can be. I did not spray not a drop of pesticides this season. This food was grown probably 90% organically. I do use some, and I used very little, but I did use some synthetic fertilizer. But in general, I know what's in my food that I grow and how healthy it is, and I know if I share it with friends and family that I'm, passing that good, healthy food along. So I hope that I've inspired you guys to maybe try to do some gardening in your own backyards. And I'm going to wrap this up for today. So I hope everyone has a good rest of the weekend, and I look forward to my next video. So have a good weekend, and we will see you next time here at Southern Tier Gardening.